late, but that's fine. Hello, hello. Sarah needs a TV monitor, so we're gonna all have to move over to the Win room, at least for the first hour. So you know where the Win room is, don't you? It's just that away. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
She wants a smart board. She doesn't want a white board.
She wants a smart board.
Yeah, the smart board she's got stuff on her computer that she wants to put on the smart board.
Can't she bring the TV over here? Can I? Why didn't she? Okay, to be continued. Just stay here. Okay, Santiago's bringing a TV monitor over here. Let me go talk to Sarah. So don't move. Okay, we're setting up here, so just relax. Relax. Oh, don't worry about it. We've had enough problems in the past. This is a minor inconvenience compared to everything else.
Does this work? It works. Hello, people at home and people here. My name's Sarah Marcus. I'm a staff member here at .rel. I am... Everything's going right today. I'm the Assistant Director of Youth Engagement and the Youth Group Advisor. Yes. And my mom is Melinda Marcus, the former Sisterhood president, and my grandma is, where are you? Right there in the front, Susie Wozniak. So I'm so happy that my family's so connected to .rel, and so am I. And I'm so excited to be here with you guys to show you my favorite art from history. Art is my passion. I hope to go to graduate school one day to study arts business. But for now, I just get to share my passion with you all. This art is a combination of artists you've definitely heard of before, but maybe don't know so much about them or the art piece I'm going to show you. Some interesting stories related to certain artists and pieces, and we have some Jewish stuff in here as well. Also, I tried to pick art that I've seen maybe half of these in person, just to add some level of a personal experience too. So the first one I want to point out is the Arnolfini portrait. This portrait is from the Northern Renaissance period, as you can see by the year. How do I get the mouse? Whatever, we'll pretend the mouse is not there. This is actually extremely small. This is only 32 by 20 inches. It's in the National Gallery in London. I've seen this in person. The detail in this is absolutely stunning. This mirror that they have in the back was done by horsehair brushes, these details, and it details the entire it details biblical scenes, both New and Old Testament, and shows the entire scene happening from behind. So we can see who's being greeted at the door. Oh, it's a touchscreen. Oh my God, technology. Now, what's something that you guys notice about this woman right here? She looks pregnant. She's actually not pregnant. This is a marriage scene that's happening right here. And that's what clothes looked like at the time. They wanted this pregnant look because it's supposed to show that the woman was fertile and that that she could be pregnant, but she's actually not, was not the point. But yeah, that was... One, we have to remember that the early Northern Renaissance was behind in terms of linear perspective and anatomical authenticity. So the portrayal of big bilious clothing isn't as accurate as you would see in Western Europe at that time. Yeah.
So there is this, I don't remember which students are.
Sorry, this is not wireless.
You are right, Susie. I'm so sorry. So I don't remember which streaming service it was on, but there's this woman who wanted to recreate historical costumes. And one of the ones and there's this workroom in England somewhere, which, would never be in the United States, but there's a workroom with seamstresses and pattern people who recreate the clothes and construct them by hand the way they would have been constructed in time. And one of the dresses was that dress. And it just had all these pleats in front. So the dress was, I don't know if she looks like she might be holding up some of the dress on top of her
Yeah,
waist.
she looks pregnant, but it's because figures at this time are elongated and not proportional. So the lack of linear perspective mastery in the Northern Renaissance at this time. But this is what a typical Northern Renaissance home would look like. I'm
So
sorry,
can I
have
interrupt
so
for a
many
second?
pieces to get into.
Can I interrupt? Berna, you were doing costume design for, yeah, she was involved in costume design, so.
Ah, that's awesome. So the next piece I want to get into is a Jewish one, the Golden Haggadah. This is in the British Library in London. You can look at the entire digitized version of, there are 101 pages in this Golden Haggadah. Haggadot did not become independent books until the 13th century. So this is one of the first Haggadot that was being produced as an independent book. This is from Al-Andalus, which is the Iberian Peninsula. And this was at a time of great religious tolerance, so these books were able to be produced. Now, can anyone spot Pharaoh in this folio? Pharaoh, yeah. This is the plague of lice and frogs. Yeah, and who does Pharaoh look like? They depict, because this is in medieval Spain, they depicted Pharaoh as the king of France. Yeah. Pharaoh does not look Egyptian whatsoever. He's depicted as French royalty. And what's extremely interesting about this folio, about this Haggadah, is 56 of the 101 pages have women in it. The reason for that is that this was actually passed down through women in the family. This was financed for a wealthy woman, and she passed it down to daughters and daughters and daughters when they got married. This is the dedication page that's in the beginning, and there is actually a great issue of provenance here. Provenance meaning who's the owner of this. It refers to, at first we don't know if it says Natnu or Netano because there's no nekudo in it, there's no vowels in it. So we don't know if it was referring to, because of the lack of vowels, we don't know if this was given to a son-in-law or to the groom, because the reference to the son-in-law, whose name is Elia, which I keep right there. See, Natnu or Netano, Elia. We're not actually sure if at one point this got passed down to a man. And also this title page is an addition. It's not from the original version. So at some point a family member added this page. Super, super interesting, and you could see the entire thing online. We get into the Baroque period. This is one of my favorite artists, Artemisia Gentileschi. And Artemisia, this painting is in Naples. Artemisia, she put herself in all of her paintings. She was influenced by, when she was about 18, she was sexually assaulted by an artist, and her maid let it happen. And this is actually one of the instances where she was so famous already that they exiled the man who assaulted her, which was not something that happened back then. They asked if she wanted to marry him. She said no. They're like, okay, he's gone. This is the depiction of the man. This is her. And that's what she wished the maid would have done. And so she inserts her life into her own paintings. It's very, we're getting close to Hanukkah, so we put Judith at a lot of our, has anyone seen a Chanukiah with Judith on top of it? That was a stylistic choice in the 19th century to depict Judith on the top of a Chanukiah, to show strength, not to show violence or revenge, but more the strong characters that we have in our Hanukkah story. And she puts herself in a lot of the Baroque art, which is very emotional, very gruesome, and does not leave any details out, that's for sure. So definitely look up Artemisia. Her Baroque stuff is extremely powerful. Now we travel to the Fiat city of Isfahan. Fiat is a city that is entirely designed before it is created. Not many of those exist today. There are certain parts of cities that are obviously designed beforehand, but the entire city of Isfahan was designed beforehand. This is in 17th century Persia. And what do we notice about this tile that we normally wouldn't associate with Muslim Islamic art? There's people in it. Yes, that's because that is a myth. It is specifically Ottoman art that doesn't have people in it. Safavid Shiite art from Persia had people in it. It had Muhammad in it. It had animals in it. They didn't avoid imagery of living things. That was strictly the Ottomans. Those are those mandalas and those floral designs. Those don't come from here, but that's what dominated. The Ottoman Empire dominated a lot of the world for decades, and well, centuries. So that's what we know, but this is not the reality. And the entire capital was moved to Isfahan in this period, and the Ottomans reacted to this because they didn't like attention being taken away from Istanbul, and that's when they started to get taken over, and that's why we don't really know much about the Safavid period or the royal city of Isfahan. This tile panel is giant. This does not do it justice. It's 4 feet by 8 feet, just this one panel. It's in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. A lot of these are from London because I was there for about 10 weeks, so I got to see all of these in person. It is giant. In fact, they recreated an entire room with all of these panels along the side, and it really transports you back to the 17th century.
Is that part of a permanent exhibit? Or
Yeah, it is part of a permanent exhibit. Yeah, the Victoria and Albert Museum specifically focuses on crafts, so ceramic tiles is right up their alley. So,
Do they
yeah.
know, oh,
Go, please.
I'm wondering if, I'm trying to talk loud.
No, you're
Uh,
sorry.
Do they know how it was originally placed in, you know, in what, was it on the floor, was it on a wall, was it?
It was all,
on a-
yeah, so it was originally placed on a wall. This was a wall and this wasn't specifically in like a mosque or something. They just had these everywhere. This is just, they wanted to depict what life was like in Isfahan, which was very relaxing, very, very decadent, and a lot of time in nature. Jacob van Riesdael, this is actually in the Detroit Institute of Art. This is about 5 feet by 6 feet. He's considered one of the great Dutch landscape painters of the 17th century. He is Jewish, yes, this is a Jewish cemetery. Everything about this painting is very 17th century Baroque. He's trying to force the viewer into a lot of things. Can someone shout out, just what's the first thing you see in this? Can someone tell me the journey their eye takes when they look at this painting?
from the bottom to the,
Bottoms where? What bottom?
from the water to the white tomb to the castle-type building.
Is that what you guys are doing?
Well, up the tree.
Up the tree?
Yeah, and then white rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing,
To me, the most prominent was the clouds in the background with the sky. That was really very impressive.
I'm seeing the cemetery,
The cemetery first.
the other ones are after rain, above the brown,
Oh, up here.
up a little higher.
The ruins?
Yes.
Okay. The point that all of you guys are seeing something different is exactly the point. There's a lot happening in this painting. Actually, true center is the exact true center. There are mourners right here.
Mourners?
Yes, there are 3 figures. There's someone, I know, it's super, super small. It's super small on purpose because the emphasis is not on people. The emphasis is on nature and on this concept called the sublime. The sublime is when the natural world mixes with the overcoming emotion of the natural world. Also, usually there's some sort of death scene involved. Here, we're looking at a cemetery as well as the ruins of a church. And this sort of fascination of fear and astonishment is called the sublime. So we do have mourners here. There's a figure standing right there. There's a figure down below. And there's another actually hidden figure. It's hard, it's impossible. I can't even see it on this screen. But they are like right, I can't even point it out. And they're laying at a grave. Everything about this is actually made up. It's all allegory. Broken trees are used very frequently to represent the life being broken off, which is usually depicted at a cemetery. Rushing water, life is going on. We have a rainbow, life is going on. These are very common themes that are used in these Baroque and then later Romantic paintings, and also usually just places of worship in ruin, because what lasts longer than anything is nature. Nature eventually overcomes everything. Now, Jacob completely made this up, except for the cemetery. The cemetery is a real place, and we know this because these tombstones are in the exact places that they exist in the cemetery. It's the Beth Chaim Cemetery on the outskirts of Amsterdam. You can go to it today. It's an active cemetery. It's been active for 500 years at this point, and we have the personal physician of the French Queen Marie de Medici is buried there because he was Jewish. It's a Jewish cemetery. And the Pardo family, who are known for, there's a family of rabbis who are known for translating the Shulchan Aruch to Spanish. So we have some famous Jewish families that are buried at this synagogue. And we actually did not know this was a real cemetery. We didn't know this was a real cemetery until the 19th century when someone pieced it together and was like, oh, those gravestones, those sarcophagi are in the same place as this painting, which is insane that someone took about 200 years for them to realize that, oh, he painted a real place because there's so much that he just added to it. Now, I have added Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz in here because she is considered the first feminist of the Americas. There's a great Netflix, I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore. It's called Juana Inés, and it's about her life. It's in Spanish. And this is in the National Gallery of Mexico. Now, to have a woman's portrait be done in the first place is incredible. To have it be in the National Gallery in Mexico is another thing. It's also 5 feet by 7 feet. It's really big. It's really big. For a society to care about this woman so much is absolutely incredible. She only joined the nunnery so that she wouldn't be forced to marry and that she could pursue learning. That's all that she was interested in. And she was a child prodigy. She was already helping at this time, it's the Virrey of Spain who is in charge of Mexico, and she was already being consulted on in physics, philosophy, theology, and math by the age of 15. I don't know what this woman had to do to prove herself to get into court at the age of 15, but oh my God. And everything, all the imagery you see in here, yes, it is Catholic, but it's all about her intellect. The patron saint they have in here is Saint Jerome, which is about literary pursuits. And she's surrounded by books. Honestly, aside from the habit that she's wearing and the cross, it's all focused on education. It's all focused on her as a scholar and an intellectual, not as a religious figure or even as a woman. And so she is absolutely incredible.
Sarah,
Yeah.
she's a nun.
Yes.
And the reason I know that without even looking at the picture, S-O-R. That's
Yeah.
Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She's a nun.
Yeah. There's a lot of her poetry you can find on the internet, and eventually she got too big because she started getting feminist and even LGBTQ poetry published, and so the church forced her to relinquish her literary pursuits and destroyed her library. But the artist Miguel Cabrera, he memorialized her in the proper way with this painting. Another absolutely incredible woman, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun. She was the royal portraitess of Marie Antoinette, and this can be found in the National Gallery in London. Does anyone want to take a guess as to how many portraits there are made by women in the National Gallery in London? Let me say there are 2,300 paintings that are in the National Gallery. How many of those, does anyone want to take a guess, are made by women?
200.
I see some fives. Oh, that's very skeptical here. So close. 25 are made by women. 12 by her. 12 by her in the National Gallery. There's a potential that she and Marie Antoinette actually had a relationship, because there are some paintings of Marie Antoinette that we don't know how she would have seen her in the clothes that she was wearing if they didn't have a very close relationship. She was married to an art dealer who was able to help her escape during the French Revolution. It's absolutely incredible that someone of her stature was able to escape. Some key elements of here that show how much of a boss she was. One, she's looking directly at the viewer. If you ever get to go to the National Gallery in London, this is it is at your face height. This is only 3 feet by 2 feet. It's not that big, and they put it directly in front of you. She's looking directly at the viewer. It was a big no-no back then. Another big no-no is her makeup and the amount of chest she's showing. That was also a big no-no, especially on a self-portrait. This is a self-portrait. This was not for anything. This was purely to challenge the viewer. And the third one, and this is something that you guys can keep in the back of your mind anytime you look at art, is the yellow hat. Yellow is a color that artists use to show off. The more yellow there is in a painting, the more this artist is trying to show off their skills to everyone. All the time when you see those bowls of fruit, there's always a bright yellow one, because they're like, look, I'm using yellow. So anytime you go to a painting, check to see how much yellow is in it. It's the hardest color to paint with because of how easily it blends with all the other colors and doesn't stay pure. So the fact that she made a whole hat out of yellow and then included 2 colors of yellow on her painter's tablet is just showing off her character for sure. This is The Milliners by Degas. I'm sure you guys have heard of Degas before, very famous artist. This you could see in our very own Getty Museum. It's pretty small. It's 2 feet by 2.5 feet. And 1882 was a really big year for the humanities. 1882 was was the start of what was called the Belle Epoque, which was when we had all of these artists living in the same place in France, and then we had some living in the same place in England. This is because we had the Franco-Prussian War that forced artists all to be in the same location, and this ended up catalyzing the Impressionist period, which is one of the most, of course, well-known of all time. This is also the year that Victor Hugo wrote Les Mis. It's the year that Oscar Wilde produced his largest collection of works. This is a great booming time. It was also the Industrial Revolution, which was not great for a majority of people. And this is what Edgar Degas is trying to encapsulate. I specifically chose this painting and not any of his well-known ballerinas, because this one I feel has so much depth and meaning to it. One, the bright, expensive colors are very, we don't see many bright colors, and that's because fabric is extremely expensive at this time, and he's trying to show that she's kind of imprisoned by these hats. Milliner is a hat maker. I'm sure you guys know that. We don't know who this is. This could be another coworker. This could be her younger self thinking that she's gonna buy one day the hats that she's making. This could be, again, this could be a real person. This was painted over so many times, we don't even know what they originally were. We're kind of guessing their hats. She could be going crazy from mercury poisoning, which was very common in the hat industry. And she looks so depressed. She looks horrible. I don't know, like, she could be just focusing on her work. She could be noticing that she's never gonna be able to afford what she's making. Yes, Susie?
Lots of yellow.
Yeah, you got to throw in the show off while you're painting an extremely depressing scene out here. And I really urge you guys to go and look at this painting, which we have again at the Getty Museum, and just you can really feel how miserable this woman is in person. You just look at this and you start feeling morose. She's trapped by her work. She's behind these hats. She's never going to escape. She's kind of blending into those hats and the background. And she could even be standing outside a window in the back. This could be a window, and that could be distorting her because of she's outside. We really don't know. There's so much that you guys can interpret. Paul Gauguin. Paul Gauguin, another artist you guys have probably heard of before. This painting I absolutely love. Paul Gauguin, not really one of my favorite individual human beings. He's one of those artists that went to Tahiti just to paint primitive people. And also he dies in 1902, and he was starting to go blind at this point. Paul Gauguin was a good friend of Degas. I was saying all these people were friends at this point. Another interesting note about Gauguin is, you guys have probably heard about Van Gogh and the chopping of the ear and all that stuff. Well, that was because Van Gogh was in love with Paul Gauguin. Paul Gauguin visits Van Gogh. Van Gogh's brother Theodore was like, hey, Gauguin, you should come paint with my brother. You guys would totally hit it off in terms of your painting style. Van Gogh became obsessed. We know this from both Van Gogh and Gauguin's journals. This is information that exists from their journals that's on the World Wide Web. Gauguin started to become afraid of Van Gogh because Van Gogh was saying, if you ever leave, I'm going to harm myself. Gauguin was there for 2 months. Eventually Gauguin left in the middle of the night, and Van Gogh cuts off his ear, sends him his ear. Gauguin was like, oh my God, this man, I'm glad I got out. He probably was going to kill me. Van Gogh checks himself into a mental institution when he never hears from Gauguin again, and we know the rest of Van Gogh's life. So Gauguin, very influential in Vincent van Gogh's life. But this painting, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Is 4.5 feet by 12 feet long. This is at the MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I got to see this again in person. It is huge. I can say 4.5 by 12 feet. You have to experience 4.5 by 12 feet. It's supposed to mimic a fresco. A fresco is when you paint on wet stucco, which is very common in the Renaissance. And he does this in the corners, which is why they're yellow. He's trying to mimic frescoes. And it's just, you can kind of read this as, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And he's really inspired by his version of mysticism, which is just the Tahitian way of life. And he was just so enamored by a non-Western way of thinking that it really put into perspective what humanity is supposed to be. And there's just so much to look at in this. And I just want to know what anyone in here feels when they look at this painting.
You know that man who's like that, Jesus on the cross. Oh,
You want to use the mic?
yeah.
Sorry. I wish this was.
No, oops, sorry. Is it okay? Can you
No, you're
talk
good,
through
you're
that
fine.
one? Sorry. Anyway, this figure here reminds me, from a distance and back there, it looked like Jesus on the cross, in a way.
What's he grabbing?
I don't know, it looks like a ball of some sort, something circular. Is it fruit, like an orange or something?
Mango.
An apple?
What do we have in our Jewish mythology that involves someone
Well, the
reaching for a
apple,
piece of
maybe-
fruit?
Maybe it's Adam and the apple, I don't know.
No, exactly. We don't know. We don't know. That's what makes it fantastic. That's where we put our own ideas into it.
Jesus on the cross, he was like that.
100%. And again, like, this is Gauguin trying to interpret what he sees from his own European perspective. So he's going to have to make it look like something that he is familiar with. He would have been familiar with Jesus on the cross, for sure. He would have been familiar with picking forbidden fruit, for sure. So he's interpreting what he is seeing in Tahiti with what he can understand in his brain. Yes.
What is the blue figure in the back?
I'm going to, it's definitely a statue. It's definitely a god figure from the culture that he was visiting. And it's in between what are we and where we're going, which I don't have an answer for why that's right there. But there are definitely something to think about why it's located where it is, why it's there at all, and why you're definitely supposed to see it, but it also blends in with the background. So what is that also supposed to mean? Blue is if in the Renaissance period, things got bluer as you got further away, and we see that's why the background's blue, and it starts to get blue as you go into the distance. I don't know what it's supposed to mean. There's so much to think about with this.
For me, it's like afterlife.
Yeah, it easily could be. It's in the middle ground. Most things your eyes don't notice when they're in the middle ground, but he made it large for a reason. It does kind of look Buddhist. Again, he probably would have been exposed to definitely not a true Buddhism, probably whatever bastardization of Buddhism got back to France in 1897, well, earlier, and that also could be a way that he's dealing with what he's feeling. He's also going blind, remember, he's gonna die in a few years from this point. So who knows what he's mulling over in his head at this point. A few more. Yankel Adler, Waterworld, The Destruction of Vuj. At first glance, this is not a Holocaust piece. If we look at our time period, early 1920s, this is about 2.5 feet by 1 foot. This is oil on board. It's at the Israel Museum. Yankel Adler came from a huge Orthodox family in Łódź, Poland, and he got conscripted into the Russian army during World War I, and this is his reaction returning from war and seeing what Poland was like. Poland at this point was no longer a part of the German Empire, and because of the Russian Revolution, they didn't have an economic relationship with Russia. And so Łódź, being a very industrial town, experienced the economic crisis well before the rest of Europe and the world experienced the economic crisis. It was in complete ruin, and we have some Hebrew lettering in this piece. Can anyone see the Hebrew lettering in this piece? It's super small on purpose.
On the green
Yes, on the green. Super hard to read from here. It says okay, I don't know how I did that. It says le'adish. Le'adish is a word that I did not know. I had to look it up. Does anyone here know what it means? Yeah. So le'adish means indifferent or listless, a feeling of apathy. And in the top left corner is his vision of what the city of Łódź was like before the war, and kind of like a thought bubble, how it exists in the top left corner. And I mean, he does not look happy. What's the first emotion that comes to your mind when you look at that face? Sadness, despair. Yeah.
World War I was sort of the beginning, was sort of the very beginning and blending into World War II. All the time in between.
I'm a little bit afraid of this process, but okay.
Thank you. World War I was really a very beginning of World War II. They sort of blend in together if you read the history and what was happening in between people in Germany, what was happening there, what people in the rest of Europe, what was happening to us. It just blends if you read the history.
For sure. This piece, though, is for sure not about Judaism. But being Jewish, he's inserting, obviously, Jewish feelings into the piece. Yes. Sorry.
I thought that it depicts not despair, but rather infinite sadness.
Yeah, 100%. There's just a hole. We also see in the super bright part a shin, the one bright part of the piece. What do you think the one bright part of the piece with the letter shin probably means? Ooh, doesn't mean that. Right here. It does look like a mezuzah. I didn't even think of that. That's so good. When I was thinking of Shin or Shem, one of the names of God, for me, I'm thinking one of the bright spots is God. We also see super small right here. It says Ein, which means none or nothing. So not only is there listlessness, there's also nothing except the shin. Yeah.
Is there any significance to the fact that the lower hand is not complete? Only has 4 fingers.
It does look like that, and I actually was sitting on my table trying to recreate this piece to see what exactly it is he's doing. It kind of looks like a finger is tucked behind, and that this is not his pinky, and that a finger is tucked behind his arm like this.
It looks like the bottom 2 digits are just folded.
Yeah, it could be. Oh yeah, they're saying that the fingers look like they're just folded in, which for sure. Again, I was sitting at my table doing the position, trying to figure out like what that was. If it's possible that a finger could be fully tucked without seeing, it is possible. So I'm gonna assume he doesn't have 4 fingers, but it is also very common after World War I to depict loss of appendages, not to mean they literally didn't have appendages, but that parts of them were gone. Now, usually that's not 1 finger, usually that's an arm or a hand. Usually it's a hand, very famous one called by Ludwig Kirchner, that not a Jew, that is after World War I that has that. Yankel Adler, he actually moved to Germany after seeing what Poland was like and got to work with artists like Paul Klee, Marc Chagall, and the Bauhaus School. When he was kicked out in 1933, he tried to join the Polish army, actually, for World War II, and had to leave because of health reasons. He went to the UK, where during World War II, he went all across the UK setting up art galleries of Jewish artists. So he was putting on exhibitions of Jewish artists during the Holocaust. His whole family passed away in the Holocaust, but he continued his work of showing off Jewish artists to the whole world, which is absolutely admirable work. He died in the 1950s. He had health issues like, his whole life. The last thing I have for you guys is, I don't know why this mouse. It's called Pardes. When I go to museums, when something catches my eye, I take a picture of it, and then I look it up later. And this is one of those pieces. This is in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. It's about 5.5 feet by 6.5 feet. It's huge. And this is one of those pictures that I just had in my camera roll and had to like reverse image search this. And Shmuel Bach, as it says in the Tel Aviv Museum for his name, he is still alive. He's 90 years old, and his first art show was at 9 years old in 1943 in the Vilna Ghetto. This man was an art prodigy, and he managed to survive World War II. He was carried in a sawdust bag, survived the Holocaust, and managed to make it to Israel at the age of 15. Now, when he got to Israel, he didn't get to Israel in 1949, based on his age, a little bit after. And at this point, the Zionist secularization efforts were rejecting any sort of Yiddish or Hasidic traditions, which were fundamental aspects of pre-World War II Jewish art, including Shmuel Bach's art. He was seen as anti-Israeli. His art was met with very mixed emotions. The society in Israel was trying to repress and silence any art that depicted the Holocaust, because that was not something that Israel wanted to focus on, and that pushed him even further to never embrace Israeli art, which usually focused on landscape and full Israeli culture, and rejected an Eastern European life before Israel's existence. So he's still met with mixed emotions today, but can anyone tell me what Pardes means? No, Pardes is actually an acronym. Yeah, it's an acronym. Yeah, for, oh my God, I'm trying to remember. It's the 4 stages of knowledge. So one is Peh, which we have Pardes spelled out here. Peh, Resh, Daled, Sin. And so we have what the meaning, the overt meaning of the text. We have the rhetorical meaning of the text. We have the homiletic meaning of the text, and we have the mysterious hidden meaning of the text. And that's how we're supposed to study Torah. There's 4 layers of studying Torah, and it's that we use the acronym Pardes. And sorry, I can't remember what the 4 words are in Hebrew. Yeah, Peh and Sod are the 1 and 2. I cannot remember. Drash is, yes, Peh, can't remember the second one, Drash and Sod. Yes.
There's a large, please use the mic. Our people at home appreciate that.
This is our last one, I promise.
It's good to go up close because I could not figure out one thing from the back at all. So
Yeah,
if you
please
can't
come up
see-
close, for sure. There's a lot happening in
Yeah,
this.
it's a totally different.
Do you want to describe this piece for us?
No.
No, I wanted to.
No,
I appreciate that.
I wanted to tell you, and maybe you know this already, there is a place of study in Jerusalem called Pardes, that my children have studied. They met actually and got married. They were study partners there. And they continue to bring in wonderful people from the States, from all over the world, to study there. And they have great programming. And my kids are very involved, and it's a wonderful place to be. Okay.
Thank you for sharing. So, what shape does this look like to you guys? Yeah, Luchot HaBrit. Our 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets, is what the shape is. And we also have the 2 tablets right here. We have, in this tree, we have numbers. These numbers are supposed to be meaningless. It's supposed to be the mystical meaning. We don't know what they are, but we have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 6, and 10. I'm sorry, I keep touching the screen. In this tree represents life. Who knows what the meaning of life is in this tree? We have in this room, it looks like scrolls. You can't tell if there's anything written at all, what's written, if there is something written. And then here we have a very obvious crematorium depiction here. There are bones up top, and obviously this is dominating the left side. But just like how the smoke is clearly going up still, the tree is also clearly going up still. It's not that this is overpowering the tree. They are equal, and just like how we should not forget, like how Samuel Bach is making sure that we're not forgetting Eastern European Jewry, we're also not forgetting that life is continuing. Both of these can exist, and both these are important to constantly remember. So I really hope that you guys at some point could get to the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. They're open till like 10 p.m. That's Tel Aviv for you. And we also have this landscape that just continues forever. So the Jewish people will continue forever. The land of Israel will continue forever. And as a lot of Eastern European artists in general like to do, they like to make up landscape just to make things look prettier. Israel, we know, does not have mountains like this with snow on this side and no snow right here or right there. They love to create landscape just to make things seem more emotional and larger than life. And yeah, that's what I have for you guys today. Yeah.
I thought
Yes.
that, yes, definitely, this is life, no question. But I thought in the opposite, this was the troubles of life.
Sure. Yeah. Why not? There's no art is what we like to call, has ellipticality. Ellipticality is a unique term for art. It's from Arthur Danto's philosophy of art. And when something has ellipticality, it means there's always a meaning that's hidden. When you have a stop sign on the street, there's no ellipticality to it. It has one meaning. If you have a stop sign in a museum, then you're like, why is this here? I know what a stop sign means. Why is it here? Same like if you had a stop sign on the roof of your house, why is it here? There is now a hidden meaning that we don't know, and everyone's going to have their own interpretation of why it's there. So thank you, Zissel, for saying that, because yeah, that is equally correct, because we don't know. That's the point, and that's what makes it so beautiful, and that's what makes looking at all of this so beautiful. So thank you so much for having me here today. Close what? Oh, yeah. Yes, I don't have to move the screen. This was, again, there was no rhyme or reason to anything I chose, aside from I've seen a lot of these in person. I put them in order of year, and I love all of these, and I think a lot of these have backstories to the artists or the pieces that I wanted to share. So there are obviously dozens more that I could have put in here. So thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me show these to you.
Yes, Sarah, thank you so much. This is, very instructive. And I think we'll have you back. Part 2, this is part 1, and we'll have part 2. You're so knowledgeable.
One thing about really old art, there's a theory that the artists that have real detail, like their first picture, use the camera as mirrors, so they were able to draw in the detail.
You can have another 10.
I didn't even know how it worked in the first
You
place.
can turn it around.
That would be a good start.
Or just turn it around. You
Final
can't see it.
grandma over here. That looks like actually my niece. Are you proud? I don't even know if it's, oh, here, I got it.
That's the worst thing. That's the worst thing that could have happened in my life.
I can also send all these pieces to Susie, and she can send them to you guys if you want to look at them in your own time, on your own. Yeah. Yeah. I got you. I'm coming in a
She's a passion for it.
I know 28 that says above. Amount of people are coming to my house. Oh. Okay, so what time is it? I don't know. I'll be sleeping. So where's your guy? He was sick last week or something.
Oh, no, he's not sick. He's just running around errands today.
Like enough is enough, huh?
Yeah, no.
No, he can't do it. Two things at one time.
No.
He's not overloaded and things to do.
He's overloaded, but he doesn't take a day off. We're, you ready? Okay, if people can take their seats, we're about ready to start. I'd like to introduce Joette Labinger. Everybody knows Joette, and she's been a member here at ADUT for many, many years. Hello. Hello. All right, if people could take a seat now. And I'd like to introduce Joette Labinger, and she's been a member of MID for many years, as well as a synagogue. And we asked her at the last minute to cover today, and she graciously accepted, and I've heard her before, and it's always outstanding.
Thank you, Rosie. Okay, so Rosie asked me to talk about my time being married to a member of the Air Force. My husband, Rabbi Marv Labinger of blessed memory, was a rabbi, a chaplain in the Air Force for 30 years. When he was in rabbinical school, we still had a draft, and everybody who entered rabbinical school at the time had to sign an agreement upon entering rabbinical school that upon ordination, if needed, they would volunteer to join the military. When it came time for his graduation ordination, they said, we need 8 of you to join the military. I think there were about 20 in his class, and nobody volunteered. So they pulled names out of a hat, and he got chosen. And as he put it, he thought he lost the lottery, but he won the lottery. He went into the Air Force with the intention of serving for the required 2 years, and he ended up staying 28 beyond that. This was a gift to him when he retired. from the chapel staff at the Air Force Base, which was March Air Base, which was his last assignment. And what it shows, it says Rabbi Marvin Labinger, Chaplain, United States Air Force, 10 August 1960 to 31 August 1990. So that's the center. Underneath this center thing are all the ranks that he achieved. Lieutenant, Captain, Lieutenant Colonel, Major, Lieutenant Colonel, and full Colonel. And underneath that are the uniform equivalents to these medals that he received during his time in the service. Right here, it shows the two different insignias that they had for Air Force chaplains. The one on your left shows it with Roman numbers, which was the way that they had it when he entered the service. But the one on the right has the Hebrew letters to show the Ten Commandments. So they kind of updated. This is the symbol of the chaplain service of the Air Force. And on the side, each of these emblems is a different military command. And underneath each military command are the bases that he was stationed at in that command, and it gives the names and the dates. As I mentioned, he was in the Air Force for 30 years. When we got married, he had already completed 15, so I was in for the last 15 years. Before we got married, he was the first Jewish chaplain at any of the military academies in the United States. So none of them had a Jewish chaplain before he went to the Air Force Academy. Since then, they all have gotten Jewish chaplains, but at the time, none of them had a resident Jewish chaplain. Also, some of you may be familiar with the Air Force Academy and its chapel. It's a beautiful, beautiful chapel building, A-shaped. It was originally supposed to be longer, but the funding was problematic, so they made it, instead of one long building, they made a two-story. And so the main floor, the longest part, is the Protestant chapel, and then the lower level, part of it is the Catholic chapel and part of it is the Jewish chapel, and it was built while he was there as the Jewish chaplain, and the artist Ludwig Volpert designed many of the pieces that are in the Jewish chapel, and Marv helped and worked with him on designing the pieces. So that was a very significant part for him. Yes? That is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Okay, so as I said, I came into this 15 years in, and the first base that I was at with him was Keesler Air Force Base, which is in Biloxi, Mississippi. And we used to say that the best thing about Biloxi was New Orleans. We were an hour and a half from New Orleans in Biloxi, and we used to go to New Orleans about every 6 weeks to 2 months to pick up kosher meat. one of the things that other chaplains had said to Marv throughout his career was how impressed they were that he was so observant of the laws of kashrut wherever he went, that he wasn't cutting corners or cheating or anything. They were always very impressed that we did that. So we went to New Orleans. We would stop at the kosher market in the morning and put in our order and walk around the French Quarter and have some, an enjoyable time in New Orleans, and then come back to the market, pick up our order, and come back to Biloxi. I was a school teacher, and I was fortunate that every place that we lived, I was able to get a job. I taught in a town about 20 minutes away from Biloxi called Pass Christian. And when I got there, 1974, it had only been integrated for 5 years. And some of the teachers who were there prior to integration and since. And what happened was, when the school was integrated, there was white flight out of the school, and the parents who could afford it sent their kids to Catholic school for $25 a month. So the school, when I was there, was like 90% black and 10% white, the ones who couldn't afford the Catholic school. So I remember there was one teacher there. She was much older than me at the time, but probably younger than I am now. And she described to me the first day that she came to work, that the school was integrated, and as she put it, she looked out across the auditorium where all the kids were gathered, and she saw all those little black heads, and she cried. She actually was very nice to the kids and was a good teacher, but it was just very hard for her to adjust. It was a new lifestyle in the South at that time. We were in Mississippi for a year, and we were not married when I first got to Mississippi. We were married later on, and the Air Force said, "We're going to give you a new assignment. We have a wedding present for you. You're going to Spain." We said, "Okay." So our next assignment was at an air base called Torrejon. It was about 20 miles north of Madrid. And we could have gotten base housing, but we would have had to wait 6 months. So we said, well, if we have to move now and then move again in 6 months, it doesn't make sense. Let's just find a place that we'll stay in for the expected 3 years that we would be there. So we found an apartment on the northern edge of Madrid. So there was a highway that went from not too far outside of our apartment right to the base. And it was funny because, I watched, I assume some of you watched House Hunters on HGTV. So they have an international one. So I'm looking at apartments and places that people are looking at nowadays, and they look so different from what I saw in Madrid in 1975. We were looking for an apartment. We had a couple of things that we needed. We needed a bedroom that could fit our king-size bed, and we needed a living room that could accommodate our couch because it had the end tables attached to it, and it was 10 feet long with the end tables. So this was not easy to find in Madrid at the time, so we ended up in a 5-bedroom apartment for the two of us. But that's because it had the rooms big enough. The Air Force took care of shipping our furniture everywhere we went. And that was a big deal because we had 17 bookcases filled with books that went every time, and those were not counted. We had an allowance of weight of how much our furniture could weigh that they would ship, but the 17 bookcases with the books were considered professional necessities, and therefore they were not included. So we always were able to get all of our stuff. So when we looked at this apartment, we looked in the kitchen, and what was in the kitchen was a sink with about this much counter space on one side and none on the other. And that was it. The family that had lived there before us was military, so they sold us an American stove, a washer and dryer, a refrigerator. So we had a stove, a refrigerator, and a washer and dryer. Not one cabinet, except the space under the sink. Now, I look at house hunters these days, and they all have cabinets. They all have it. But back then, you had to buy your own cabinets. So we bought cabinets, only lower cabinets, and and it worked. But it was just a different way of approaching how you move in and what your lifestyle is like. And in Spain, there was a local Jewish community. The main synagogue, the only one that we were familiar with, was on a very small side street in the center of Madrid. It had a Jewish star in the wrought iron gate, and that was the only way you knew that it was the synagogue. Now, technically, Judaism was still not allowed in Spain, which was why it was so quiet. And 3 months after, but it was still on the books, but it was not really enforced. However, it wasn't publicized that this was the synagogue. 3 months after we got to Madrid, Franco died. And along came King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia, and things were better for the Jewish people. One of the things that happened was that Queen Sofia was going to university, and she took a class on comparative religion. And one of the things that she had to do was go to a service at different religious houses of worship. So she was coming to the synagogue, the Queen of Spain, and she needed a Jewish service. Well, this was a Sephardic shul, but still it was, Orthodox. And the women were upstairs, and the men were downstairs. And she was the queen. They were not putting the queen upstairs. So they had a section in the very front of the synagogue for the queen, and I don't remember what service it was. It was definitely not Shabbat, or holiday, but there was some service that they were able to do, and the Queen was there to observe it. One of the nice things that we did was on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we, as a Jewish community from the base, would go to the synagogue in Madrid. And they had it was a Sephardic service, but it was just lovely to be part of that community. And we really enjoyed our time in Spain. 3 years, we were there for 3 years. Keeping kosher was interesting, as I said, Jewish community, Orthodox. So there was a local kosher butcher. So it was in a mercado, a market, where everyone had their own stand. So there was one stand for the kosher butcher, but he wasn't there every day, only like 2 or 3 days out of the week. So we would go there to buy our kosher meat. Well, the butcher spoke Spanish and Hebrew. And neither of us spoke Spanish. I didn't speak Hebrew. Marv spoke Hebrew, so he could communicate with the butcher. But he had no clue as to the name of any cut of meat in Hebrew. So we would go to the butcher, and I was quickly identified as a pampered American because I was not going to kosher my own meat. Nowadays, you don't find a butcher that doesn't kosher meat, but at that time, once the animal was slaughtered and the meat was butchered, you had to salt it and rinse it and salt it and rinse it and all of that. And that's what people did in their homes. They would buy the meat, and they had a special board, and they would salt it and rinse it and do that at home. Well, I didn't, because in the States, by then, all the butchers were doing the koshering for you. So the butchers, we would tell the butcher when we were coming, and the butcher's wife, who did the koshering for them, would kosher the meat. So how did I get meat? He would have this hunk of meat like this, and I would say, oh, I want so many steaks, such thickness, and he would slice off the steaks. Then I say, okay, I need a roast. So he would cut how much do you want the roast? Okay, the roast. And then the rest of it, I said, chop meat. He put it into the grinder, and I got the chopped meat, and that's how I got meat. Chicken, Marv asked the commissary on the base, which is the base supermarket, to supply Empire chicken. And they said, well, we can only do it if a minimum amount is sold, because we have to buy a pallet or whatever they called it, a case or whatever. And so Marv went on a PR campaign for kosher chickens, and we convinced the other chaplains, all of whom are Christian, to buy kosher chickens. And they said, oh, yes, they are better. Yeah, okay. So that's how we were able to get kosher chickens into the commissary. So we come to our first Thanksgiving in Spain and go to the butcher and ask him if he can get me a turkey. And he says, turkey? Only the non-Jews eat turkey. I said, well, we do. And there's nothing wrong, obviously you can eat a turkey. We do all the time. What he did was he said, well, I'll get a turkey from one of the non-kosher butchers while it's still alive, because the butcher was able to shecht it, to kosher slaughter it himself. So it always amazed him that we would eat turkey, but he did that for us. He got us a turkey so we could have turkey on Thanksgiving. After our 3 years in Spain, we went to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, which was Eglin Air Force Base. And that's in the panhandle of Florida. So it's really southern Alabama. And it was definitely the South. While we were there, is when they had the Cuban boat lift, and 10,000 Cubans were transported to Florida, and there was a refugee camp set up right next to the Air Force Base. So 10,000 Cubans lived right next to the Air Force Base. And since Marv had just been promoted to the head chaplain on the base, he was put in charge of the religious needs of the Cubans at the Cuban refugee camp. Now, 95% of them were Catholic, and so he arranged for Catholic priests to come and do the religious services for them. We had a donation center set up on the Air Force Base for clothing and other things, and he was in charge of that and getting clothing and other sorts of needs over to the people in the camp. And he ordered New Testaments, rosaries, crucifixes, all for them to use there. Approximately, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people were Jewish. And the way that it was set up was the Cubans who were there could leave the refugee camp if they had a sponsor someplace. And I think there were 1,000 Jewish people, and they were the first out because the Miami Jewish community immediately sponsored them and took them out of the refugee camp. So Marv was visiting the camp numerous times. And one day, as he was getting ready to leave and go back to the base, he saw a flyer on the windshield of his car which said, "The KKK is watching you." And, you know, that was kind of creepy. But just north of us, in Destin, Florida, was the local KKK headquarters, and that was like 20 minutes away. So they were not happy that all these Catholic Cubans were so close to them, and so they certainly made their displeasure known. Luckily, there wasn't any violence or anything like that, but it was clear that they didn't like us there. Now, Panhandle of Florida is not the easiest place to find kosher food. So we had an arrangement with a butcher in Atlanta. And we would call up the butcher in Atlanta and place an order. And our meat was flown in on dry ice, which I don't think you're allowed to do anymore, from Atlanta to the airport in Fort Walton Beach, which shared a runway or was next to the runway of the Air Force Base. So the butcher would say, it's on flight so-and-so, arriving in Fort Walton Beach at such and such a time, and Marv would just drive around to the other end of the base and go over there and pick up our kosher meat. So that's how we did it there. When we were done in Fort Walton Beach, which was another 3 years, we were transferred to Nellis Air Force Base, which is in Las Vegas. And I was very fortunate there because there was a Jewish day school, and so I was able to teach at the Jewish day school. And there was a wonderful, wonderful Jewish community in Las Vegas. And Marv was sent there to be the head chaplain at Nellis Air Force Base. They had not had a Jewish chaplain there. They were probably not going to replace him with a Jewish chaplain. So we did not have a Jewish community on that base, which we had in all the other bases. What happened was Marv arranged for the Orthodox synagogue, conservative synagogue, and Reform synagogue, which was what was there at the time, to welcome the Air Force families to their services. And that's what happened. So we became part of the conservative synagogue in Las Vegas. That's where the day school was housed, so I was able to teach there, and we went to services there all the time. And always the Air Force members were welcome at the various synagogues. But at the time, as wonderful as the Jewish community was, we would come to LA to get our kosher meat. And my sister was in LA, so that was great for me. So we would come in every 6 weeks to 2 months and buy our meat and take it back to Las Vegas. It was really a very warm Jewish community. It has now grown immensely. When we were there, the Jewish community was in the center of town, right off the strip. Or at least that's where the conservative synagogue was. There was also an Orthodox synagogue not far away, and I don't remember where the Reform synagogue was. But after we left, as the Jewish community grew, the conservative synagogue in the center of town split because the Jews were moving southeast and west. So the synagogue that was in the center of town basically moved west, and the group that was going southeast formed a new synagogue. So there's now 2 conservative synagogues in Las Vegas, Beth Shalom, which is the one that was in the center and moved west, and Midbar Kodesh is the one that's now in Henderson, which is southeast. So the coincidental thing was when Marv retired and we moved here, that was around the time that the synagogue was getting larger. It hadn't split yet, but they needed an overflow service for the high holidays. So for the first 7 years that we lived here, we went back to Las Vegas, where we knew a lot of people and a lot of our friends, and he did the overflow service for the high holidays. So that was kind of a nice touch. After Las Vegas, our assignment was to Germany. And so here's what happened when we heard. First of all, when we were in Spain, we got to go to the Jewish retreat. There was a Jewish chaplains retreat and then a Jewish personnel retreat every year. It was held in Berchtesgaden, Germany. Berchtesgaden was Hitler's playground. That's where he went on vacation. It was in the Bavarian Alps. And that's where the Jewish people, Jewish military personnel, had their retreat every year in Hitler's playground. And when we were in Spain, we would go there, and I would think to myself, oh, I feel so sorry for all these people who are stationed in Germany. They have to live in Germany. Lo and behold, 10 years later, there I was, and we were being assigned to live in Germany. We were stationed at Hahn Air Base, which is about 60 miles west of Frankfurt and very close to the Mosel River. Nothing Jewish there. Although Marv's secretary, and because of the status of forces agreement of having American military bases there, the requirement was that they had to hire local Germans to fulfill some of the jobs. So Marv's secretary was a local German woman who at the time was in her 60s, I think, and this was in the 1980s, and she said that she remembered when she was young, there was a matzah factory not far from where we were. And we were in an area with just a lot of small towns, nothing big, but there we were. When we found out that we were going to Germany, we would tell people. So when we would tell somebody who was not Jewish that we were going to Germany, their response was, how wonderful, what a great location, right in the center of Europe, you can travel, you can this. And that was true. It was in the center of Europe, and we could travel, and that was marvelous. When we told somebody who was Jewish that we were going to Germany, they said, oh, how do you feel about that? You know, that, and it was like just about 100% reaction on both sides. And so it was an interesting experience. I constantly felt like there was a weight on my shoulders, even though nothing, not one negative thing Jewishly ever happened to us while we were in Germany. So, being in all of these small towns, no kosher meat. Now, we could have gone to Frankfurt, which was an hour away, but we weren't crazy about Frankfurt. Instead, we drove an hour and a half south to Strasbourg, France. Strasbourg, France was a charming, charming medieval town. It was just beautiful, but they had a nice Jewish community. There was a Jewish community center there. In the Jewish community center was a kosher butcher and a little cafe. So we would drive down to Strasbourg, France, put in our order with the kosher butcher in the morning, walk around this charming medieval town, have our lunch in the kosher cafe at the JCC, and pick up our meat and drive back to Germany. It was just the most delightful experience. Marv and I each had a different way of dealing with being in Germany. His way was doing an intense study of the Holocaust. And we now have, because of that intense study, a bookcase and a half of Holocaust literature, not just literature, studies, you know, fiction, nonfiction, just all sorts of books about the Holocaust and what happened in various areas, and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that we did was whenever we traveled in Germany, we would go to the Jewish cemetery, wherever it was. And you'd look at the gravestones on the Jewish cemetery, and the gravestones would be, all the dates would be up until the late 1930s, and then they would start up again in the 1960s. So obviously, in between, people weren't buried in Jewish cemeteries in Germany. After the war, some people did come back, and then when they passed away, so starting 1960s, they were buried there. We would say Kaddish or Kel Mole at each of those cemeteries. As part of their penance, I guess, the Germans were very, very meticulous about restoring and maintaining Jewish cemeteries, which was a nice thing to see. The other thing that we did was travel to Eastern Europe and visit the camps that were available to visit. We were at Auschwitz, we were at Treblinka, we were at Theresienstadt, we were at Sobibor, we were at Majdanek. I mean, all of those on various different trips to Eastern Europe. And the way that I handled being in Germany was anytime that we had vacation time, not counting the Eastern European stuff, I would just plan travel someplace out of the country. So we used to say, you know, when we lived in the States or we lived elsewhere, we would say, you know, for an anniversary or a birthday or something, we'd go out to dinner. When we lived in Germany, we'd say, oh, we'll go out to a country. So we were 2 hours from Luxembourg, we were 3 hours from Belgium, 4 hours from Holland, 5 hours from Paris. So that was one of the ways of dealing with being there. I was fortunate enough to teach in the school on the Air Force Base, and it was a pretty big school. It was a pretty large base considering where we were located in the middle of nowhere, because I was one of 11 first grade teachers, which was, and one of the sad things, or not sad, but just one thing I noticed, I used to get the moms of my students to come in and help in the classroom. And according to the Status of Forces Agreement, they were not allowed to get jobs. I could get a job because I was an American teacher at an American school. And so, you know, and also the spouses who were nurses, mostly nurses, not usually, there weren't doctor spouses. The spouses that were nurses were able to get jobs in the hospital on the base. But other jobs, they were you know, on the base, they had to hire local Germans, like I mentioned, Marv Secretary, and the military spouses were not allowed to work on the economy, as it was called. So these moms would come in and help out in the classroom, and whenever I would arrange a field trip, now I'm teaching first grade, we didn't go very far, But we went to local German sites, and all of them would want to come as chaperones on our field trips because they were afraid to go on their own. And I thought that was kind of sad. I was very glad to offer them the opportunity to join us and go out. But a lot of them, they were young marrieds, you know, they had little kids, and they were just afraid to venture out. So I was glad that I could give them that little opportunity to see a little bit of the countryside with their kids. So that was nice. Let's see. Am I doing on time? Okay. So if anybody has any questions, Susie. How did I meet Marv? I was going for my master's at UC Davis, and he was teaching a class at UC Davis on basic Judaism. And I thought, oh, I'll take that class because I could probably boost my GPA. So it's a good thing that they told me I couldn't take it for credit because it was a lower undergraduate course and I was a graduate student. But by the time I found that out, I was already into the class and I liked it, and so I audited the class for the rest of the semester, and the rest is history. Alan. Okay, Ellen asked what kind of questions did people come to Marv for. I will say he did not discuss those types of things with me, but I'm sure when we were overseas, well, even not overseas, there was a lot of homesickness going on. Also, before I knew him, he was stationed in Japan during the Vietnam War. And airmen who were stationed in Vietnam would go to Japan for R&R. So he dealt with those kids who were in Vietnam and getting a little bit of respite. There were many times when a service person came in and was dating a non-Jewish person, and they would talk about how serious they were, whether the other person would convert, that sort of thing. One thing that was noticeable is that if there were weddings coming up, Marv never got to do them because Jewish personnel who got married went home to get married. They didn't get married on their Air Force base, wherever they were. Same with funerals. They were sent home. If there were any funerals, they were sent back to where they had come from and buried at home. So he didn't do a lot of weddings and funerals, which you would expect. One thing he did do, which is really kind of odd, is that if there was a baby boy born on an Air Force base, it was unlikely that there was a male in the vicinity to do the bris. So Marv would be there with a doctor. The doctor would perform the circumcision, and Marv would do the appropriate prayers and things that went along for a bris. So he did a lot of those. Yeah, Shirley. So Shirley asked what was my favorite place and my least favorite place. I have to say I loved being overseas, either Spain or Germany. As difficult in my head as Germany was, the opportunity to travel was unbelievable. I remember one time I was sitting with two fellow teachers in the teacher's lounge one day, and winter vacation was coming up. And everybody's talking about where are they going. So one was going to Egypt, one was going to Israel, one was going to Kenya. And each of the other two had been to the other two places. So I think at that vacation I was going to Kenya, and somebody else was going to Israel, where I had been, and somebody else was going to Egypt, where I had been. But those opportunities were just there. I mean, when we were in Germany, I'll tell this, we went, at the time Germany was still split, East and West Germany. Berlin, as you know, is in the center of East Germany. We wanted to go to Berlin. So the way to go to Berlin is to take a train. So the train goes from West Germany, but then it crosses the border into East Germany. As soon as the train crossed into East Germany, the train was locked. Not to keep us in, but to keep the East Germans off the train. They didn't want the East Germans trying to get onto the train. But put in your head being on a locked train in Germany. As soon as we crossed the border into West Berlin, train was unlocked, and we got to the station, and we stayed in West Berlin. Well, we wanted to go to East Berlin, and the way to do it, according to the Status of Forces Agreement, is we had to be on a military bus. Marv had to be in uniform, and the bus would take us through Checkpoint Charlie. So we went through Checkpoint Charlie, and we get to this area of East Berlin called the Alexanderplatz, which was Alexander Plaza. Most of the people who were going because they wanted to buy Leica cameras and telescopes and binoculars, which were cheaper on the eastern side. Marv and I were going because there was a synagogue on the eastern side that we wanted to see. We were given strict instructions. We could not get into any other form of transportation. We could not take a bus, a car, a taxi, a train, nothing out of Alexanderplatz except the bus we came on to take us home. So we figured out, we had a map, and the synagogue was about 10 blocks from the Alexanderplatz. So we walked. Well, after we got about 3 or 4 blocks away, we just kept getting these very odd looks from people, because here's a gentleman in a United States Air Force uniform walking down the street. And that was not a common sight in East Berlin. So we got to the synagogue. Somehow somebody found someone who could open up for us. It was in very sad disrepair. There really weren't very many Jews still left. Whether they had a minyan or not, I don't know. But it was just interesting to look at and to see the reaction of the East Germans and, walking there and back. Yeah.
I'm wondering if I know in Spain you were able to use Hebrew talking to the butcher and whatnot, but when you were traveling in other foreign countries, did you have translators assigned to you at all?
No, we did not have She asked if there were translators. When I was in Spain, I took a Spanish class. I could pretty much order in a restaurant, get a hotel room, and say pleasantries with the oh gosh, what was he called? No, it wasn't a concierge. There was a guy in our apartment building who was the doorman and the maintenance man. I mean, and there was a word for that person, I forget what it is. Anyway, I could exchange pleasantries with him, and he, always kept an eye out for me when Marv was on a temporary duty assignment. He would be gone like for 10 days or something, and had the lovely man, Portero. The Portero would kind of keep his eyes out for me while Marv was gone. It was, that was the extent of, because my work and his work was on the base in English. Okay. In Germany, when we traveled around, Marv knew Yiddish. And because he also knew Hebrew, he knew which words to leave out when he was speaking to someone who spoke German. And the response he would get from them is, "You speak such a beautiful Altdeutsch, Old German, but we can tell you're not from this part of the country." So that, so we got by with his Yiddish, and everybody was and one person even said to him, "Oh, you speak so beautifully, and to think we were destroying this," or, some comment like that. Yeah, let's.
So when I was living in New York, in our synagogue, we had a fair number of people saved from the Holocaust in our synagogue. And there was one couple that was from Germany. And what he said was that they did not speak Yiddish in Germany because it sounded uneducated. They spoke the German because otherwise they would sound like they didn't know anything.
Thank you. My least favorite. I would say, either Biloxi, Mississippi, or Fort Walton Beach, Florida. I mean, they were small southern towns. I mean, Biloxi's not that small, but it was small. And, I just didn't enjoy the South. Ray. Oh, yes. Okay. So, have a little more show and tell here. Okay. Okay. Here is Marv's certificate of retirement. And this is a certificate of appreciation from President George Bush upon his retirement. And this is a certificate honoring his memory when he passed away, also signed by George Bush. Yeah, and one of the things, okay. This side is a letter that George Bush wrote to my husband when he retired. And this is a certificate of appreciation that was given to me for being a supportive spouse. Yeah, that was it, yeah. At his retirement ceremony, they did all the funny story about the retirement ceremony. When Marv entered the Air Force, he was at Lackland Air Force Base for just a few weeks to get military training. But the only military training he really got was how do you wear the uniform and how to recognize all the insignias on the uniform. And he said that they tried to teach the rabbis to march, or the chaplains to march. He said it didn't work well. And that was evident as his retirement because all the chaplains on the base were supposed to march in, and they just kind of strolled in, you know. So they never got the marching thing. But at the retirement ceremony, I got a bouquet of flowers. Marv, after Germany, Rosie asked when we came to LA. After Germany, Marv had 2 years left in the Air Force, and the Air Force was kind enough to station us near where we wanted to live. We discovered that in all of our living in various places that we really were city people, both being from New York, but we didn't want to go back to New York because of the weather. So we said, well, let's go to LA. It's got what we need, especially in terms of Jewish community. And my sister was here, and the weather is better, so they sent us to March Air Base in Riverside. So we spent the last 2 years there, and then came here. He did not wear a kippah all the time. He wore a hat. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people now also would wear a hat as opposed to wearing a kippah all the time. It depended on where he was. I thought it was very funny because sometimes when he had a picture taken, especially a military picture, he would not wear a kippah, but when his mother got the picture, she would draw one in. Okay. Oh, I didn't think to bring a picture of him. Yeah, I think I might have one in my wallet. I will check. Okay. Oh, yeah, I won't be back in class until December. So